my experience was the vast majority of our delegates were patriotic Utahns that gave a lot of their time and energy and talents to vet the candidates, to be engaged in the process, to spend a very long day at the state convention where we went through so many rounds of voting and all of these various candidates. That was inspiring. Very small percentage of folks that I saw were behaving poorly, and you know, we don't excuse that.
We're going to always get that.
You'll get that in any organization. I don't care if you're at a school, at a church group, a voluntary organization, the workplace. You always have a small percentage of mankind that just behaves a little bit differently than you and I would prefer.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the 435 podcast here in Southern Utah. I'm your host, Robert McFarland, and today we have another member of the Army of Robs. Yes, I have an imaginary Army of Robs, and Robert Axson is the current chair of the Republican Party, and he joins me today. We talk about the caucus system, why it's important, why we need to keep it here in Utah, signature gathering, why that's not any good, but we also talked about some other things, got to know him a little bit more. It was a great episode. We hope you get some value out of it and understanding the Republican ticket here in Utah. If you're coming from elsewhere, we hope you can get a window into the thought process of the Republican Party through Rob. And thank you to our brand sponsor, our brand partners, FS Coffee Company. Make sure you go check out Frozen at the Tuacahn Amphitheater. They're partners of ours as well. Want to see us succeed. We want them to succeed. And Blue Form Media, our producers here of the podcast, they do a great job. But other than that, share, give us a review, help us keep this going in Southern Utah so people can understand what's happening here, get some value out of it. We'll see you guys out there. Enjoy it. As the chair of the Republican Party for the state of Utah, what do you think is the most value of the caucus system? Like what do you find valuable in the caucus system?
Great question. I think the key thing that is most valuable that first comes to mind is accessibility. That the caucus system allows for anybody that's interested. Now, you're going to get those people that say, what are you talking about? I have to take a couple of hours out of my week to go and show up and go to caucus meeting. Yeah, you do. Mm-hmm. But it's up to you to decide if you want to do that or not. Like there's no limit on you doing that, with the exception of you have to be a registered Republican. That's the only barrier to entry. Yeah. But we are a private party doing our own process, and so we want to have people deciding for our party who are members of our party. So I don't see that as being a high bar to cross. Aside from that, yeah, it's 2 hours of time once every 2 years.
And even if it was 3, like this is my thought too. I was like, well, I mean, you didn't have to come do this. Yep. I'd rather get it all done right now than to do like 50 minutes here and 50 minutes over here and maybe an hour over here, right? And spread it out over time. You're trying to organize all these people and all their schedules to do this really important thing. Yep. But the schedule wasn't a surprise. It was all laid out in front of you. You had plenty of time to prep for it or prepare for it. Even the county CCC meeting, I think was the delegate the post convention delegate meeting that was down here just a couple of weeks ago. There was only half the delegates that were there. We were only at like 48% of the delegates showed up to that. They gave us that date 8 months ago. Totally. It was on my calendar. I was like, I didn't need a reminder. I didn't need a email or a text message. Like I didn't need all these things. It was, hey, you got to show up to these things. Okay, put them on my calendar. I'm good to go. And when the day comes, it shows up. It's on my calendar. I just don't know why people kept thinking, oh, I didn't know about it. Right. You did. Well, think about this too. I think as a country, one of the challenges that we have right now is so many folks are being encouraged to disengage. And we have these false dichotomies that are out there that somehow like short and sweet and efficient, maximizing 5 minutes of time, that is somehow like the best option moving forward. And if anything takes a little bit longer, that's then a negative. And think about this, like anything of value that we engage in, whether it's your faith, your family, it takes a lot of time. Mm-hmm. I'm one of those weirdos that still liked 3-hour church when, the predominant faith here moved to 2 hours. I was on the side of 3 hours. Yeah. But okay, we're at 2 hours. Still, you're looking, that's 50 weeks a year. You take out the 2 conference weeks. Yeah. 50 weeks a year that we're committing 2 hours of time. Yeah. And that's how you accomplish building a faith community within your local congregation. Yeah.
It's the same in a lot of faiths, whether you're going weekly or multiple
Any
times
network.
a week.
Any
network. Exactly. And that's where the value comes, because you know people, you know the relationships, you care about them, you care about the issues. You're perfecting yourself by thinking like, what do I actually think about this issue? It's the same in politics. And yet the social media and pop culture and the elites around the country, whether they're the government elites, the academic elites, the business elites, they just kind of want us to stay quiet on the sidelines. Like, oh, don't worry. Go home and watch your favorite show. You can binge it. We just put out a whole new season. Binge it all today.
Yeah.
Don't be involved. We've got this for you. I'm just not one that believes that.
Yeah.
I believe that we are all better off as a country when we lean into the process, where we run to be delegates, we engage, we attend caucus, we see a problem, we try to figure out a way to solve it without relying on government. And I think political parties are a great way to do that. And getting back to your original question, I think that the caucus system here in Utah is an accessible way for any individual who's a member of this party to lean in, to get involved, to get started, and then see where their talents can take them. And they can offer a lot of solutions to a lot of our state's problems, I believe.
Yeah. And I think it's funny because I know a lot of people get taught, and I've talked about this before, but you don't talk about religion and politics, right? And after generations of that specific sentiment, you end up with two parties and then this big gap in the middle. And the two parties are more zealous and have gotten more and more energy around just their really solidified beliefs, right? And that tends to show up with a lot of passion, especially nowadays. Especially like this is really like post-COVID. It fired up a lot of people in a way that's not necessarily positive, but in a way that is adversarial. And so
absolutely.
all those people that went all those years of saying, don't talk about politics and religion. Now, if they get in, they're like, oh man, it's actually really tense and emotional in those political conversations, and they don't want any part of it.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. I've thought about this so many times and engaged with countless conversations around this very same thing. The two things that tell you more about your inner beliefs and who you are is talking about politics, talking about religion. And I would say the only other thing that's to that is talking about your family. Those are the three things. And as a country, at least two of the three, we're telling people, no, don't talk about that. And I would even say, by and large, it's like, oh, don't tell me about your family's problems or challenges or successes. I don't need or hear that.
Yeah.
You just deal with that on your own. Well, then you're taking the human condition, every individual here, 330 million Americans, and we're saying, live your life, but do so quietly. Don't share any of your beliefs. Yeah. Just do it in private.
The most fundamental
That's
parts
right.
of why you show up every day, why you get out of bed.
What's the point? What's the point of life? It's to be who you are, to learn from one another, to serve one another, to engage with one another. And I think you do that by respectfully sharing about your faith, respectfully sharing about your family, and respectfully talking about politics. If we don't practice that, we'll never get the respectful side of it done.
Yeah. And then we were just talking about how, we have the social media breeds so much of this negativity. It's like this space where so many people go to throw knives or have a mosh pit, as me and Gary Henderson have talked about in the past, right?
Yeah.
But the perspective that is that negativity is there, the reality is that's where people's attention are. Like the vast majority, all those people in the bell curve, they're there. That's where they're watching things unravel there. And my argument is we can choose to allow that area to be just full of negativity, or we can choose to have as much of a rational voice as we possibly can. We have the ability to actually write, like think through what we want to state. We're not required to have like this, quick response, quick jab. We don't have to do that. You could take a second to write it out. Like there's threads that I've put in a bunch of the Republican groups, these private groups, asking about the caucus system, and it'll go for weeks. I'll get people that'll chime into it, right? Where they'll have this thought through opinion about the caucus system.
An idea.
Yeah, for like 3 weeks, I was getting a couple of comments, and then a few days no comments, and then a few more comments. But it was an opportunity for people to. The first wave is all like, caucus system's the only way, signature sucks, right? And there's like this huge wave of that. And then you start engaging with a few people and asking more questions to draw some of that stuff out of them. And then you can really start to flush some of those things out. Facebook, orienting the threads to where you can kind of pay attention to them and see like a running conversation is difficult, but there's some limits to that. But there's no other attention. The attention could be this podcast, but also people don't want to listen to an hour podcast on Southern Utah all the time, right? Or 2 hours or whatever, however long the conversation is. They don't have that much time.
Yeah.
So those little snippets of social media, I think, are so important. But why do you think, so this, out of all those questions I asked all those delegates and candidates, it was, how long you've been a Republican? Have you been a delegate before? So many have not been delegates before.
Yep.
So many. And Lisa Sandberg in Washington County, she's like, oh, that makes me so happy. And in my mind, I'm like, that's making me uncomfortable. That so many faces and so many people are first-time participants. Why are we turning over delegates as much as we are? And maybe I'm looking at it wrong, but every time we turn over delegates, they don't know the process. They're confused. Registration is hard. It takes longer. They don't know Robert's rules. It makes the meetings kind of chaotic and difficult to navigate, which if you're somebody that kind of understands all those things, it could be really frustrating to have to like slog through all of that. And then you're like, I don't want to do this again. Yeah. It's just so exhausting. Yeah. So then we end up kind of going down to this lowest common denominator. That's the way I'm watching it unfold. That's how it feels. Am I off?
No, I think there's certainly some places where that would be the valid response and concern that you have of, wait, why are we turning over? But I do think that there is that other side of the coin that is also inspiring. You and I are both a little bit younger than a lot of Republicans, and yet we're the youngest state per capita. And if you look at the average age, well, I'm actually older now. I'm past that. I think it's 38 is the average age of a Utah. I'm 40. So I'm now on that bell curve riding down to that final end zone, wherever that is.
You're just getting started, dude.
Right?
Come on.
So you look at that, and I think it's good to have some turnover and have some young blood and some young delegates. One of the things that I was most excited about at the state convention is when I saw a bunch of folks that were 17 and 18 years old, because in our rules, as long as you turn 18 before before the general election in November, you can be a delegate. You can vote in the process. And so we had some 17-year-olds there.
That's awesome.
And it was awesome.
Yeah.
So I like seeing that turnover. I saw some people where it's like, hey, I'm a single mom and I just wanted to get involved. And there was a story of this woman who, I can't remember how many kids she had, 2 or 3 kids or something, single mom, just struggling to get through with what is going on with inflation and making sure that she can make ends meet each month and pay the bills. And the way that she wanted to make a difference, in addition to all of the work that she's doing for her 3 young kids, is I really wanted to be a delegate and be involved in the process. That's what she told me. And seeing her there, it was fantastic to hear her perspective. And so, she's not been involved in the past. She had young kids. She was doing other things. And now she's woken up to the fact that she should and could get involved, or you have these other young people. So those are examples of turnover that I'm glad to see. I think it's good for the party to have broader perspectives and backgrounds and ideas. And then we unify around what our party believes, what are our key principles, what's the platform of the party, and how do we advocate that? But what I would say for the caucus system is, as folks that defend it adamantly or oppose it adamantly, neither one is correct, right? Neither one is 100% accurate. There's certainly lessons to be learned. So your defense and support of the caucus system can't take you to a place where you're unwilling to think through, how can we improve? How can we make this a more accessible and appropriate system? Not in any way that waters down what we believe, but instead makes it a better system. And folks that just adamantly hate the system, in my experience, most of them have never even been to a caucus or haven't been to a caucus in like decades. And so it's always kind of a little bit.
You have the governor that's opposed the caucus system, not necessarily in word, but kind of in action, at least the way he kind of showed up. At least this is the first one I've been a part of. So it's hard for me to weigh his whole opinion on it. And obviously I haven't talked to him specifically about this, but it seems like there's a growing group within the Republican Party and across the nation, right? There's only 5 states that are caucus states. Is there the drift towards going to a straight primary? I see the route going that way only from the perspective, going back to, you get this turnover of caucus, especially the state delegates, that you have a big percentage that it's really hard to catch up and then learn. but me being able to watch it from the outside was really helpful. So like if I was to do it again, I'm like, okay, I got the lay of the land, or at least like the process and expectations are there. But if not setting up all those expectations, I think it is disheartening to a lot of people, especially qualified like leaders within the communities, to want to do it because the process is so overwhelming with people that don't know what they're doing or uneducated, right? And so I can see how that has been degraded. And I think, this is my theory, I think it has been degraded because participating in the caucus, if somebody can just go gather signatures, then why are we doing the caucus? If you could just gather signatures and get on the ballot at the primary, why does the Republican even do a caucus? You just go get signatures.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right in the sense that once we bifurcated and had that dual path process, you created an outlet of participation to a completely different, separate system that is not grounded in the principles or the party process. Mm-hmm. And that allows for an outlet of a substantial number of people who, in the past, we would have had engaged in the caucus process. And so it would have, I guess the best word is to moderate. And I don't mean that moderating our principles. I think you can still be conservative, but your style and tone can be a little bit more open and engaging and friendly and courteous and whatnot. And sometimes our process does create a space where people are incentivized to be bombastic or whatnot.
I think somebody said it was hijacked by radicals. I think is what somebody had said.
Yeah, I've seen that. And
I totally get that. I'm like, I could see how the caucus system could get hijacked. I could see how, or
you could see how somebody who maybe is just taking a quick look and looking in at a snapshot of a story that they read or a video clip that they saw, and you see somebody angry and yelling
and extrapolating that to the whole system is like
they must all be a little bit like off their rocker. Oh, well, no, that's one individual who's angry or whatnot, or a handful of individuals. My experience was the vast majority of our delegates were patriotic Utahns that gave a lot of their time and energy and talents to vet the candidates, to be engaged in the process, to spend a very long day at the state convention where we went through so many rounds of voting and all of these various candidates. That was inspiring. Very small percentage of folks that I saw were behaving poorly, and you know, we don't excuse that.
And we're going to always get that.
You'll get that in any organization. I don't care if you're at a school, at a church group, a voluntary organization, the workplace. You always have a small percentage of mankind that just behaves a little bit differently than you and I would prefer. Yeah. Now, again, I'm not giving them a pass. I think especially if somebody is crude or vulgar and whatnot, there's no place for that. And we're better than that as Utahns. We're better than that as Republican delegates. But the vast majority of what I saw was very productive and well-meaning Utahns. But getting back to kind of that caucus approach of when you bifurcate, I think the biggest thing that we can do as a society here in Utah is, instead of waiting every 2 years and then kind of thinking about caucus again, and it's like, oh, okay, I guess I got to go down to caucus. I would love it if our schools started teaching about that in civics lessons again. I know Utah, a number of years ago, the legislature required a civics test because we had moved away from, even when you and I were growing up, where you actually had to learn some of these things. There was a season of education where there was no learning in the civics process and how to be civically engaged and what government is. We're now moving back that way. We probably need to move back that way a little bit more, because citizenship requires understanding of what the basic rules are and what the basic process of engagement is. And that's how you have a seat at the table. Keep in mind, the federal government was created by the states, not the other way around. And the states are there to serve the people. We are the sovereign. We're the individuals that, under our system of government, have the power and authority that we then defer to the states and then to the federal government. But if we never teach people how to be a part of that, then it becomes very easy to just be sheep in the process.
So I can see how, okay, the civic, I think I love the idea of the civics, especially with the younger generations in the schools and things like that. Making that a requirement, I can see how there's a lot of this, a perspective of, it's like, is that really is that the most important thing for kids to learn in schools and spending our money on that? There's lots of debate here. My other thought was, and this is something I keep seeing as well, is what happened to the party as an institution, right? So like I couldn't help but think, why does the party not have a location in Washington County that they can meet with all of their delegates all in one time that they don't have to pay for every single time? Why did the party never invest in or get a donation from an individual to say, hey, this is the location that you guys can meet every time, you don't have to pay for it? It's funny to me. It seems like the Republican Party has these, we make short-term decisions instead of looking at the long frame, and the party as a whole, back to those civics things. It's extracurricular activities, education for the general public, not just kids, but what about Californians that move here from somewhere else? Where it's like, well, I'm not going to go back to school and learn this, but where do I go to learn about Utah government? Right? There's not. But the party seems like this is a great format of spending money rather than spending it on your presidential candidate's legal fees. I feel like you could, and that's my opinion, but the party as a whole, if you're gonna raise money within the party, why isn't there more money going towards the infrastructure of saying, hey, the Republican Party, we believe in this, and we got a 1,000-year view on this. What are the essential things that can keep us going, keep educating and giving tools to future citizens on how to keep this process alive? It seems like we haven't done that.
Wholeheartedly agree, and it's a delicate balance, and it's one of those interesting things because as you're raising money for the party, you have the immediate short-term gains that it's talking about the issue of the day, it's advancing the candidate of the day. Certainly right now we're supporting our convention candidates enthusiastically, but that is an immediate moment, right? It's a snapshot in history. Then you have the long-term play, which is literally talked about and thought about in years, if not decades. I'm of the opinion the Republican Party's success this year is important, but I care more about multiple decades of success of the Republican Party in order to keep Utah the place that I want my kids and grandkids someday to thrive in.
Right.
That requires investment.
Be equipped to, in sometimes when we all lose our mind, like as we have in the recent memory,
just be steady to focus.
We need to have steady focus and steady fundamentals. So what I know, the party, at least in Utah, was they had a lot of debt. There was some mismanagement of money, and that has just in recent years finally been rectified.
Yeah. So what I would say on the money front, you had, and it wasn't so much a mismanagement, though there may have been some of that at times. The biggest thing was when there was that divide that occurred between the caucus path and the signature path to access the primary ballot. A number of traditional donors to the party decided to take a step back because the party was engaged in lawsuits. And they said, and I might disagree with them, but I can appreciate the fact that some of these folks thought, I don't want my money going to a lawsuit. Okay, I can appreciate that. That put us into a place where we were a few $100,000 in debt. Derek Brown, he's a candidate for Attorney General. He was the state party chairman. When he came in a few years ago, they were, I want to say, $390 or so $1,000 in debt. I came on as the vice chair a couple months later when there was a vacancy.
And then there was a treasurer position that was elected. It was really key in that as well, I think, too, or I thought I read something about.
It's a team effort.
Like the team,
and so, when Derek was chair, I was vice chair. Mike Bird, who's a candidate for the legislature, he was the treasurer. You had that debt. We were able to retire that debt. And then after Derek, you had Carson Jorgensen as the party chair, and he did a good job. When I came on as party chair, there was no debt. So he didn't go backwards. He kept building from there. We didn't have a ton of resources when I came in as party chair, but again, kudos to Carson. He was able to help elect a bunch of good Republicans without going in debt. One of the things that I wanted to do when I took over last year as party chair was to start making those investments for the long-term success of the party, what you're talking about. Why don't we have some of this infrastructure in place to help our candidates, to promote our causes and our principles, to educate the masses, young people, new move-ins, everybody else on what Republicans believe. So we needed to start build that and laying that out. And so I'll tell you, over the last year, we've raised over $900,000 and we've begun to make those investments in long-term systems and strategies that will be successful, not just right now for our convention nominees and not just this year for this election, but into the aggregate of a long-term plan of success so that, again, Utah, Washington County, Salt Lake County can be places that we all can thrive in and want our kids to grow up in, not just today, not just 5 years from now, but 10, 20, 30 years from now. And I think that continual investment needs to happen. But there is that natural pull, sometimes you can feel like the battle today is so important. It's like, what's that whole,
it's just weird where the Republican Party, Brad Wilson calls it the ruby red state, where it's like, we are the conservative stronghold for the nation. And why are we fighting so hard in these elections? Why are we spending so much money fighting each other? Why are we battling it out versus, signatures versus non-signatures? We spend so much time fighting within the Republican Party that the Democrats are over here laughing. Truthfully, they're laughing. They call us the dumb party.
Yeah,
they do. And I'm like, I can't argue with them.
One pushback that I would have against their laughter from the sidelines is, hey, don't stop laughing. Keep laughing and being irrelevant on the sidelines as the Republican Party continues to win. But I agree, that whole adage of, I think it was the Vikings, they would burn down the ships. So there was no retreat. I think sometimes Republicans look at it, it's like, okay, let's burn the ships. Okay, if this really is the moment to burn the ships, let's burn the ships. But it can't be the moment to burn the ships every 3 months and every 6 months. And yet sometimes that's the behavior. It's like, no, like this is the final straw. This is our Alamo moment.
If this Republican gets in, the whole state's going to hell. That's honestly how it feels. It's just, I kind of break it down. Is there a lack of leadership? And I'm not challenging you as the leader of the Republican Party, but because we empower each precinct, we go all the way down the county leadership, the national government, the national party expects the state expects the county expects the precinct. Is it because we just have a lack of leadership in all of those places? Do you think that's part of the problem?
I think there's an element to that, but I also think there's a misunderstanding that far too many Americans have nationally, and certainly here in Utah, far too many Utahns have, and Republican Utahns especially is what I'll talk to. And the best way I can lay the groundwork for this is there's things that I have authority to do as the party chairman for the state. But what's interesting is most of the criticism that comes my way, I don't have the authority to do what they want me to do, whether it's good or bad. Right. It's just, that's not the role of the party chair, or that's more a question for the government or your mayor or your legislator or your county party. Because keep in mind, there's 29 Republican parties on the county level, one state party. They are not subservient to me. I don't get to make decisions for them. We are a collaborative group, and those 29 are kind of under the umbrella of the state party, but they still have their own autonomy and independence. And so that creates this space where there's expectations that are impossible to be met. People expect the state party to do X or the county party to do Y. And that's just not the role of the party. And so what I would challenge folks to kind of flip the narrative of is, instead of deferring to somebody else what needs to be done, ask yourself, what can you do? And that's the classic place where it's the JFK thing. It's Democrat. Why it resonated in the 60s. And, it was on the national level. I think it applies on the state level. I think it applies in families. I think it applies in neighborhoods. And it certainly applies in the Utah Republican Party. What can you do? If you want to see the party do more of X, lean in and build X, whatever it is, whether it's funding for candidates or it's a new platform to educate young people. What are the talents that you have that a little bit of contribution of your experience, your perspective, your pocketbook, whatever it may be, how can you, coming off the sideline and stepping in, change the dynamic of what we have? And that's one of the things, getting back to the caucus, that I love about that process, because it gives people the experience to get started. And so many delegates that their first experience was, hey, I was elected as a county delegate or a precinct vice chair, and I got involved. And then fast forward 20 years later or 10 years later, and they're a mayor of their local town, or they're in the state legislature, or they're running for Congress. That getting started moment is important. And so I'd invite anybody who's a member of the Republican Party of Utah around the state, get started. Figure out what you can do. What's uniquely up to you that you can solve an issue or be a part of the solution, and we welcome it.
So if we were to say all things staying the same, do you see a wave of more attention going towards the primaries? It feels like there's drift towards getting rid of caucus, and I've heard it and I've read it a couple of times. Is it going to be that easy? Is it going to be just like, oh, well, they're just going to get rid of caucus? Like, what would it take to get rid of caucus? Is that even like something that we should even be discussing, or is it like, we're not going to be able to get rid of it?
No, I think it's good to discuss. It's not going to be easy, thankfully, because it will force people to have those conversations where, okay, getting rid of that may be a knee-jerk reaction. What do we lose? So like, let's say there's something you don't like. You don't like elevating somebody who's just very angry to being a state delegate. Okay, that's a valid concern. Removing the caucus also removes the 80% of the state delegates who are just lovely Utahns.
Right.
So that's not really a nice trade-off. The other thing, I think the folks that really like that signature path are going to have to explain why they have their path to the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
Why is removing another path to the ballot in the best interest of the people of Utah, especially a system that is, again, accessible to anybody? You can run through the convention with literally hundreds of dollars, become the nominee, and get elected to office rather than having to raise tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And in the case of a federal race, potentially millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm. I've heard of candidates, because there's only a few signature gathering like companies that you can kind of go to, like organizations that facilitate candidates to do this, right? Because if you might be really wealthy and you're like, I'm going to run, but I know I'm going to need a signature gathering because the caucus system, I don't want to put all my eggs in that basket.
Yep.
I'm going to go I have the money to do it. There's probably only a handful of like organizations that know how to do it, that could do it and then effectively do it and get it done in that time frame, right? Yep. And so I've heard where it can be upwards of $500,000. Mm-hmm. And so, but they'll buy their ability to do it, and then they'll also pay other organizations to not do it for somebody else.
Correct.
So it's crazy that
money in the process.
The fact that our legislature has allowed and really kind of forced this upon the party is odd to me. I'm still trying to understand why did we let this happen?
I think, again, the most important thing for us long term is education and explaining things to folks and inviting them to be a part of the process. I think the confusion that occurred that allowed for the legislature and in their defense, they were trying to respond to a proposed ballot initiative. So there were other elements in society that were pushing forward this idea.
So a ballot.
So a ballot initiative is where you go to voters, and interestingly enough, it also requires signatures. You get them to sign on to put an issue onto the ballot to allow voters to decide. So
exactly what they did in California, and why we have they're supposed to spend billions of dollars on a bullet train from nowhere to nowhere.
Ballot initiatives, horrible. If you look historically nationwide, they can start with very sincere things like, hey, let's
this is like
do a park,
like pizza at lunch in high school, where you're like, if I'm elected the president of the student body, we're gonna have pizza every day,
and more vending machines,
and more
they'll be cheaper.
Yeah,
exactly.
25 cents for a soda forever.
It kind of creates the worst impact and the worst ideas of community, because they don't think about all of the repercussions, right? You're just looking at a paragraph. It's like, do you support more money going to kittens?
Right.
Well, yeah, I like kittens. So there we go.
Of course. I would love kittens.
Then you don't think through it. Well, that meant that we didn't, take care of humans. So whatever it may be. So anyway, these ballot initiatives, occasionally they can be good. Occasionally they can be bad. But one I have seen, and I've looked through a bunch of states' histories of kind of their process, including Utah's, once you start to allow and reinvigorate that process of ballot initiatives, it moves from being a backstop where the people can have an opportunity to come and voice their concern in very limited circumstances to a place of legislating from the majority. And that is not what a constitutional republic is.
It's a runaway train.
And California is the perfect example. And so you look, I think that's been one of our unintended consequences, or maybe it was intended by some, but I think by and large it was an unintended consequence of this dual path process, is we're actually feeding the machine that makes ballot initiative policymaking more likely and more accessible here in Utah. And I think that will be to our long-term detriment if we continue to allow that. That's the process where I just think more education of us explaining and talking with one another. And it's not just from the party perspective. I would rather that the Democrats had a stronger party and were successful in their own limited ways in a fair process that had accountability and accessibility to all Utahns. I'm not looking to game the system just to the advantage of the Republican Party. I think the ideals and the principles of the Republican Party can stand on their own and be interesting and appealing to Utahns. We don't need to game anything. But I think that the people of Utah, the people of our country, need to get off of Netflix and get off the couch and engage a little bit. Up to and including 2 hours every 2 years at caucus night. Come on down. But let's get involved. And so that would be a challenge I would leave to anybody in the legislature, anybody in the party, is to think through what can we do to help more Utahns understand their civic duty, to understand what are the doors that they can access to then be a part of the process, and how do we get them off the sidelines and onto the playing field where we can engage and fight for our country and our state's future.
Yeah, I hear this all the time is how do we get the younger generation engaged in the party, and how do we get more people involved, or a bigger turnout at the caucus? And so in simple terms, it's so tough. It seems like there's not one answer, right? It's not one answer. It's the people have to care enough about the importance of these elections that they get out there and see the pain. But when there's no pain, we have, lots of time of not really feeling like there was a lot of pressure. You're starting to see pressure. COVID was a lot of pressure. So you get this big wave of attention that's going that direction. But going back to just our delegates here in Southern Utah, how we had, it's like 2 times a year that we're supposed to meet, and this is post convention, and only half of the delegates showed up. Right. And so it's like, what's missing in them to get them to engage? But I like your idea of like the civics, maybe not necessarily mandating civics classes in the schools, but, organizations engaging the youth, right, within the different counties to empower those, but it all costs money. It does,
but it's an investment. I would say that the education piece, obviously I'm not about mandates from Washington, D.C. and even, Salt Lake mandating to the rest of the state. We've got to be careful there. I think education is best done locally and best done with the involvement of parents, like hard stop. That's where I'm at. That's what I believe. But I do think that any type of engagement and teaching and educating that we can provide our children, our grandkids, people in our neighborhood, even in the schools appropriately, to have them know what citizenship means, what it requires, and what opportunities come from that. That's an investment worth spending money on.
Agreed.
Because long term, if we want to be the sheep of society where the elites and the academia decides for us, well, that's the path that we're going on, and maybe even, unfortunately, what TikTok decides for us and the Chinese Communist Party, right? An algorithm on the back end that's pulling out our basest instinct and making us angry and only exposing us to the echo chamber where it's like, yep, everybody agrees with me. Well, no, not really. That's just what the algorithm is telling you to think.
Yeah.
I think the more we step back and educate people on what it was like to be here in our colonies originally as we were founding a country, and what was it like at every stage of our country's history, good and bad, where contention or opportunity brought people together to solve complex issues. That's an inspiring story, and it's one that the biggest lesson that comes from it, whether you're talking about the lead up and follow through to the Civil War, the lead up or aftermath of the Revolutionary War or World War II, all of these moments, which again, contention and opportunity come from those experiences. I think the biggest lesson is that human beings and Americans have a pretty compelling and magnificent ability to accomplish hard things.
Yeah.
And to do things that nobody else has done before.
I agree.
But we have to educate our young people to realize that's what you have inside you. Yeah. That's what ancestors and history has brought to bear, whether you're...
This is what makes America amazing. This is what makes our society and culture, what has gotten us to this point has been based off of these certain set of mixtures that that are slowly slipping away and being eroded away.
And maybe not even slowly right now. I would say over the last handful of years, like the speed at which we're moving away from that and just becoming like... consumers to be entertained rather than citizens to be engaged.
It's funny.
Terrifying.
It's terrifying. I was reading where Plato discusses Socrates' critiques on democracy, right? And he values the republic, but there's like all these things that democracy ends up birthing, right? And I'm like, we did that. We did that. It's crazy that thousands and thousands of years ago, he's calling out exactly what's unfolding right now, where this system set up by our founding fathers with the balance of powers was this attempt to curb all these possible, issues. And getting back to that is the only way we get back to that is an engaged public that sees the writing on the wall, and they make a choice to say, is this important to me or not? Or am I going to just roll over and allow an authoritarian or a tyrannical organization to overcome oligarchs, which, it's a regular thing. But we still have, the system is still there. The system
it's
is
still there. We have to rescue it.
Rescue it, defend it, defend what we have, engage and push the rock forward. So as the chair, how do you have to run every year as the chair?
It's every 2 years. So it's a 2-year term that you serve.
You can't serve more than one term?
You can serve more than
It seems like we've rotated through a lot of chairs back in the past. Why do you think that is?
It's not easy. I'll tell you that. Especially because you're trying to balance all of these good intentions and good desires and a lot of passionate people who have 1,001 different ideas. Takes a lot of time and energy. And so for a voluntary position that you're doing out of the goodness of your heart, that's a lot of time to take out of away from your profession, away from your family, whatever else that you have going on. So I can understand why a number of chairs have decided, 2 years I've given of my time. I'm good. I'll be a delegate next.
So there's no pay. There's no there's no compensation.
Nope.
There's no trade. There's no trade-off for this.
No, it's you do it because you believe in it.
Nowadays, the fact that level of participation, that's unheard of. It's it almost doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in any other organization. Like what organization would be that size where the one who's basically in charge it's not non-profit. There's no there's nothing.
This doesn't happen very often. And there's some good that comes from that, some bad that comes from that. For me personally, I'll tell you, the 2 years I spent as an LDS missionary was one of the most fulfilling times of my life of just devoting myself to service. Yeah. And I wasn't going to get any money out of it. In fact, I had to save money to pay for my process of going out. Right. So I loved that experience. And so in some ways I'm trying to approach this. Apples to oranges comparison. I get it. Like faith and just truly serving people is different than political service. But I think the principle is still the same, that my desire in having been a missionary was to try to improve people's lives. My desire in running for party chair was to try to improve people's lives. And so I'm willing to have done it, even though there's no pay to it, because truly, like, at my deathbed, who cares how much money you make or don't make, or all of these other aspects of life? I think all of us will, in our deathbed moment, if we're lucky enough to have it, you'll be thinking through what you've accomplished in life. And it's those seeds that you plant to your children's success and their future, or to future generations, or to your community being a better, more loving, productive, collaborative place. Those are the things that I imagine I'll look back at and reflect with pride on, rather than the opposite. I think you could be very successful in your career, and if you haven't done those things, I would imagine that deathbed moment would be filled with some regret. And so I'm very much engaged in trying to do what we can on the party front, even in a voluntary capacity, to help our state continue to be the place that it is.
So what's your day job?
So I do a bunch of consulting work. And so for a number of years, I worked for Senator Lee. I worked for him for 13 years and left his office last year. So I've got a number of clients.
What'd you do for him?
So most recently I was his state director. So I ran all of his state operations on the official side. So we had a number of offices, staff working on behalf of constituents. So 1,001 different issues. One day you could be dealing with Hill Air Force Base, the next day dealing with the Northern Corridor here in Utah, the next day dealing with VA benefits for veterans from the Korean War. So it was always interesting. One thing that I loved about the time that I spent with Senator Lee, twofold. One, he's a very good guy. Like him or not, he's a very sincere, authentic, and accessible individual. And so people who didn't like his policies, I always encouraged them to just pause and one, be grateful that you always knew where you stood with Senator Lee. Some politicians, they'll tell you one thing and you don't really know where they stand. I think one of the benefits from folks like Mike Lee is he lays it on the line. So then it gives you the opportunity to have a conversation because you know what you agree with or what you disagree with. But beyond that, he's just a really good guy. But one of the other things that I loved working for him is my ability to have traveled all 29 counties here in Utah into small little towns, big towns. I mean, there's roads that I have driven down that no other job would have taken me there.
Yeah.
And what's amazing about Utah is we're all very similar and yet very different all at the same time, depending on what community you're in and what part of the state. And the countless stories that I experienced firsthand or that I heard about in engaging with folks and building relationships and friendships with people all around the state, I treasure that. I treasure those experiences. And it's been fun over the last year as party chair. I've been able to kind of continue that with that political hat of going and engaging with these communities, still getting to see, man, there's so many good people here.
Yeah.
Our state is filled with really good men and women that care about our country, that care about their community, and that care about Utah. And I love that.
Yeah. I think it's being born and raised here. You know, I think about, you know, how it felt at times behind the times, right? It was like, oh, well, we got the, you know, pop culture wise, or, you know, whether it was technology or whatever it was
10 years
Utah was always the delayed, you know, but, you know, with internet and everything all being interconnected, it's interesting you really get to see the breadth of the melting pot that is the United States just in Utah, right? If you're from Salt Lake down to, you know, Moab, right? No matter where you're at, Vernal, you know, all the different corners of Utah, you get a whole mix of that. So you went to school as like public administration. Like what was your thought going into this whole thing? Was it always politics? Was it always like, hey, interested in government? How'd you get here?
So my studies up at the University of Utah were focused on international studies, politics, and conflict resolution. So I was focused on kind of assuming that I was going to go either the corporate business route or law school route and deal with like resolving conflicts between individuals. And then after my LDS mission, and I had served in South Korea. So after my mission, I thought, you know, I'm going to go and focus on conflict resolution in East Asia, and heck, maybe I'll go and be helpful in resolving conflicts between North and South Korea. You have all these thoughts and these dreams. Then 2008 comes around and the economy completely crashes. And so I had this pivot moment where it's like, okay, I'm okay at math. I'm not like a math whiz, but half the legal jobs in America just disappeared and twice the number of kids are going to law school. Does this make sense to be in that class right now? And I decided to put it off. Got involved.
I couldn't even get in. I tried. I took the LSAT 3 times. I couldn't because I wanted to go to the University of Chicago or George Washington.
Yeah,
and I needed a top line LSAT score, and I just couldn't get. I couldn't get the average up enough to be able to get into it, and I didn't want to go to a second or third tier law school. It was like you're either going to go to law school and get all of the opportunities, or pick a different route, go a different direction, right? And so for me, I tried.
Let's be honest though, and I ultimately didn't go to law school, full disclosure. So I'm speaking from the outside, as are you, but I kind of look at it. It seems like a Ponzi scheme. You go and you get a ton of debt.
It was the best thing God ever did for me. Right. He's like, you don't want to do that. Don't waste your time. I'm gonna just guide you on this route over here. I'm glad I didn't, for sure.
You and me both. So very
conflict
much.
resolution though, like that seems like there's a lot of skill sets that you employ just from that as working on that specific skill set. It seems like you have to do that
constantly. And I would say my best practice of late is 4 kids. It's amazing how much opportunity you have to engage.
How old are they?
I've got almost 15-year-old down to an almost 6-year-old. So 3 boys and a girl. And they're amazing. But as any parent, I'm sure, experiences, it's amazing how much conflict occurs in any one moment about where you're sitting at the dinner table.
A complete absence of logic and reason, too. So you're like, it's
amazing. But
it feels like a caucus meeting every once in a while.
Here's one of the things, though, that I love about conflict in a family. And I'm not talking about destructive conflict. I'm talking about productive, kind of just the maturation of any family and relationships and kids growing up.
You took my toy, you get your feet off me.
Yep. Why is my Lego character on your new build? That's mine. Yep, that was a conflict from 2 days ago.
Yeah, nice.
So one of the things, though, that I love in families is you have 1,001 experiences of love and service for every one of those moments of conflict. And I think it's a good example for us to remind ourselves when we have a lot of conflict in our neighborhood, in our political party, in our political discourse, whatever it may be, and you don't know how to resolve it, maybe ask yourself, what are you doing to have those moments of love and service to then justify the relationship? Because if all you ever have is that anger and that conflict, of course it feels insurmountable and it feels like you're at direct conflict with somebody constantly. Well, in a family, you have it balanced through love. So I think it's always good for all of us to do more love and service in our community. So if you're wanting to represent your precinct as a precinct chair, or you're a delegate representing an area, or you're a candidate seeking to represent a geographic area, what's the service you can do to those very people to whom you're looking to represent them? And I think engaging in that service would, one, make you a better candidate and elected official should you be elected. But two, it gives you justification, meaning, thought, and inspiration on how to be the best you can while engaging in the political process.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, that's so fascinating. Well, so going down that road, we look to the future, right? If we're going to look to the future, after the chair, are you wanting to continue just running, campaigns? Is that kind of your thought? Had you considered running for offices?
I've been asked that before, and there's been opportunities where I, for a split minute, thought about it, and it's like, I'm good.
Yeah.
So who knows what the future holds, but I don't have any political aspirations that I have to run for office. I care more about being the best dad, the best husband, and the best neighbor that I can be. And right now, I can try to be a good neighbor to the people of Utah.
When's your chair? When are you no longer the chair?
So there will be an election next year that I could either run for re-election or not, or others could run, but that election would be next year in the springtime.
And then the delegates vote?
State delegates.
The state delegates vote for it, not county.
The same state delegates that were elected at our most recent caucus, those will be the same state delegates next year who will decide who they want to see continue to be the party chair.
Now, does the party chairs across the state change, or is there staggering county chairs shift versus state chair? Or?
No, so you have two different years. You have caucus night that happens in the even years, and it's during what is referred to as a nominating year. So this is the year that the Republican Party in Utah, whether on the state level or on the county levels, goes about nominating our candidates. So that's a nominating year. Then in the odd years, it's called an organizing year. So the state delegates goes through organizing the party, and that's where all of the county party leaderships at their county conventions run for re-election or don't run, and you have changeovers in those positions. And then at the state convention, it's again an organizing state convention. And so then the state delegates would decide who the party chair, vice chair, secretary, and treasurer are.
Okay, and then that's for the county and the state. Yep. Okay, that makes sense. So, what do you have left, right? If you were to, what can you influence? Like, is there anything that you have, with the remaining time left, right? You got about a year left. What is it what are some initiatives that you're saying, hey, I want to see this change? Maybe some specific initiatives that you can do?
So I'll give you the specific things that we're working on. I came into this with a commitment to raise enough money, not because that was the end goal, but because money raised and resources raised gives you the path to then accomplish all of your other goals. So to continue to raise the resources necessary to accomplish the other things that I'll talk about in just a moment. But I also mentioned one of the reasons I ran was to make sure that we were institutionalizing and creating systems and foundations for long-term success in the party. And so that's my commitment over this next year, is to make sure that we are building those systems so that whenever I'm done, whoever the keys to the party are handed off to, they're in a better place than where I found them. And hopefully that momentum continues to build, that then they can take it places way beyond what it's been before. And when they're done, they pass the keys on to, again, that momentum building space. So that's the long-term goal. There's some immediate goals as well that we have. So right now we're in between the convention and the primary. So under party rules, we are committed to our party nominees and our convention supported candidates. And so we are leaning into helping those convention winners across the state be as successful as possible. We want to see them perform very well at the primary, and hopefully we get a lot of those folks past that primary where they become the party nominee going into November. So that's what we're focused on for the next 4 or 5 weeks. After that, so come June 26th, around the entire state, we'll know who the Republicans on the ballot are, who will be the standard bearer for our party in November. So then you have to figure out a couple of things. one, in a lot of places in Utah, the election is effectively done at that point because the Republicans have such strength that they're going to win.
Right.
So in those areas, I have a desire to still have folks go and engage as effectively as possible with their constituents and earn as much support as possible. And the reason why is I want, like, let's say a Republican last year for a state house race received 60% of the vote. 60 to 40. That's an awesome win. I want it to go to 62% or 63% so that people nationally, when they look at Utah and they see where the trend's going, they see us getting more Republican. And wow, Republicans are doing even better than they were 2 years ago. I think that's to our long-term benefit.
And that's reversing a current trend, right?
Correct. We're kind of moving down. And so I want us to kind of move back into the place where most of our seats are very strongly performing and going to the Republican. There are some areas where we are not strong. So Salt Lake County, for example, and then Ogden. Those are two areas that we will be spending a lot of time and energy and resources and money focused on doing everything we can to flip as many of those Democrat-held seats, whether it's in the state Senate, the state House, the county council, the county assessor, like all of these various races in Salt Lake County. We are going to make sure that we are aggressively defending Republican-held seats and aggressively making the case and argument to the people of Salt Lake County and in each of their respective towns why the Republican Party has their back and why we would love to and invite them to join us and to vote for our candidates and fight for Utah's future and Salt Lake's future. And the same will be true in Ogden. So we'll be focused on those. The other initiative that I have, once you get Salt Lake in order, the rest of the state's going to perform pretty well. You've got that seat in Ogden. Well, then you ask yourself the question, like, where else can Republicans in Utah be helpful towards our national challenges that we have as a country? And I would say that Arizona and Nevada, two neighboring states that in my lifetime have gone from Republican to Democrat, they both have an open, well, not an open, but they have a Senate race in both of those where it's a Democrat running for re-election in the case of Nevada. And in Arizona, it is an open seat. So you have a Democrat member of the House who's running for Senator Sinema's seat. She's not running for re-election. And we have the need for Republicans to win those two. In order for the national U.S. Senate to flip to Republican control, you need to win in Nevada and you need to win in Arizona. You also have, in the case of Arizona and Nevada, two battleground states that will help decide who takes the White House. Is it going to be another 4 years of sluggish mediocrity of what we've received under Joe Biden, or can we get a Republican back in there and have Donald Trump and some of the benefits that have come from him that we saw in those first 4 years that he served? I'm a big believer that it will be beneficial for Utah to have Nevada and Arizona flip Republican. And so Utah is going, and we've already raised some funds and some commitments from some donors. We will be funding efforts to have a bunch of volunteers from Utah go down and knock doors and visit with folks and make phone calls on behalf of the Senate candidates for the Republican Senate candidates in Nevada and Arizona running for Senate, and on behalf of Donald Trump in those two states. And so that will be a big priority in the fall going into November.
Got it. Okay. So there's some interstate collaboration going on.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's the principles of a constitutional republic, right? You have your own domain that you have stewardship over, but then a lot of the national discussion is decided by people who are not necessarily Utahns. So it's beneficial for us to be more collaborative. And I think in that process, something else that comes forward is Utah gets to once again showcase what leadership looks like, that we as Utah Republicans are not just getting our own house in order, but we are our brother's keeper and our neighbor's keeper in this case. Yeah. We're going to go into Nevada. We're going to go into Arizona. We're going to help Donald Trump do as best he can in those states and take those states. And we're going to help Republicans retake the United States Senate. And in that process, that's how we protect Utah and what's in the best interest of Utah, because I'm one who firmly believes that the principles and platform of the Republican Party serve the people of our country better than the alternative in other parties. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. So have you seen, just going back to some of these other systems and processes to bring a younger generation up, have you seen examples, civics like classes in any of these other states? You know, is there any collaboration within states of saying, hey, let's look what are these structures that we can put into place that help, educate a younger generation? Have you seen that happen, or do other states have that stuff?
A little bit, but unfortunately, I think we're all as a country right now in this pivot point where we need to decide, are we pivoting back to what's worked in the past while learning lessons that are being learned right now? Or are we just going to continue with the status quo where we're slowly slouching away from what has always worked? One of the benefits of our entire system of government and federalism, specifically when you look at the state levels, is the ability to learn lessons. And so I want us not to look to Washington, D.C. for the answer, but to your point, I would love for us to be in a place where we get to look around and say, oh, look what Alaska's doing, and they're helping kids connect in this way, and look at what they're doing in Illinois or Nebraska or whatever it may be. In that system, I think there's a lot of lessons we can learn from the other 49 states. My guess is if we do it right here in Utah, it's going to be more what other states can learn from us rather than the other way around. But I'll take whatever lessons, whatever ideas, whatever good systems and programs exist elsewhere, and see if we can apply those here in the state of Utah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something I'm definitely interested in figuring out ways to get people engaged, continue to solidify, educating, right? It's having those conversations with as many people as you can to get them in an understanding way, get them to see why there's value in the caucus system, why there's value in solidifying and strengthening the system and process that we have as a Republican or a conservative state. How do we keep that going is educating anybody new here. This is how we do it. Let me show you how to do it. Let's walk through why we have value in this and how you actually have more of a voice in this caucus system than you would otherwise. If you care, if you're going to pay attention and you care, this is a perfect route. If you don't want to pay attention, or if you want to pay attention and you don't have a caucus system, it doesn't matter. You're just one little vote in a sea of thousands and thousands and thousands of people that it's much harder to make any significant change, right?
Well, and think it's where you ratchet things. It's that classic. Anytime we've ratcheted the authority or power or influence to Washington, D.C., does it ever come back?
Yeah, no way.
It's that classic question of like any like government funding program or whatnot. It's like, oh, we only need this for 3 years. Well, fast forward 3 years. Let's do it another 3 years. Fast forward 3 years. You're like, oh, let's do it indefinitely.
Yeah.
It never goes away. And I think it's the same thing even when we're talking about our systems of representation and political discourse and engagement, like the caucus system. You can ratchet it away from the people. It's very difficult or impossible, if we're looking towards history, for that ever to come back. And so I would very much caution against any effort to move authority and engagement and opportunity
further away from us.
And so the caucus system, again, if you don't want to participate, okay, don't participate, but figure out where you do feel comfortable participating and lean in as aggressively as you feel comfortable. But it is not to your benefit, even though you don't want to participate yourself, it is not to your benefit to ratchet away from the people of Utah engagement and influence that they currently have. I think that's just something that we should always be cautious against when we're giving more authority away from individuals to the state, or from the state to the federal government, or whatever it may be.
Cool, man. Well, this was helpful. It can help me understand all the moving parts. It definitely was. I got a sea of other questions I think I could think of, but I think we're going to wrap it here. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate you spending the time.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
This is a voluntary thing, man. I guess I should have guessed that, but the fact that you're serving in the capacity that you are, with the understanding that, hey, this is out of pure service within the system that's there, man, my hat's off to you. My hat's off to you, man.
Well, thank you. I invite you to continue to do what you're doing as a delegate and being involved. And all of your listeners, one, if you're not a Republican, figure out what we're about. Register to vote as a Republican.
Absolutely.
We'd love to have you. And anybody who's a registered Republican, you've got a primary vote coming up here in a couple of weeks.
Yep.
Look at the candidates. We encourage you to look at our convention winners who have earned the trust of the delegates. Engage with them. Figure out why your delegate voted the way that they did.
Yeah.
Figure out who those candidates are. And we look forward to Republicans winning all across this state in November.
Absolutely. Okay, man. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
See you out there.
Appreciate
guys.
it.